She was smiling when she got into the car. A bride on her wedding day, veil folded neatly beside her, heart racing not with fear but with anticipation. The road ahead was familiar, the drive routine, almost boring. No one would have guessed that within minutes, metal would twist, glass would shatter, and her life would hang by a thread. What she didn't know, what no one was supposed to know, was that this crash wasn't an accident. It was planned. She was meant to die on that road, quietly, cleanly, with no witnesses. But fate has a strange way of intervening, especially when a Navy SEAL and his dog are nearby. Welcome back to Swift Tale, where we bring you powerful, emotional stories about courage, truth, and the moments that change lives forever. And if this is your first time visiting the channel, let me ask you a question before we go any further. Do you enjoy real life, inspired stories filled with suspense, heart, and unexpected heroes? If the answer is yes, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who loves meaningful stories, and subscribe to Swift Tale so you never miss what's next. Today's story begins like a celebration and almost ends like a tragedy. A young bride, hours away from saying "I do," never makes it to the altar, or at least that's what was supposed to happen. Somewhere along a quiet stretch of road, a deadly plan was set in motion, one designed to look like nothing more than bad luck. No witnesses, no questions, just another name added to a statistic, but plans unravel when the unexpected shows up. And on that day, the unexpected came in the form of a battle-hardened Navy SEAL and a military dog whose instincts had never been wrong. This isn't just a story about survival. It's a story about awareness, about how danger doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it smiles at you, waves you goodbye, and waits until your guard is down. It's also a story about loyalty, the kind that exists between a soldier and his dog, forged in places most people never see, under pressures most people never feel. When that bond crosses paths with an innocent life in danger, the result can be extraordinary. As you listen, you'll hear about moments that seem small at first, a hesitation, a glance in the mirror, a dog that suddenly won't stop growling. These are the moments we usually ignore in real life. We tell ourselves we're overthinking. We assume everything is fine. This story matters because it reminds us that intuition, human or animal, can be the thin line between life and death. By the end of this video, you won't just know how a bride survived a crash she was never meant to survive. You'll understand how close she came to being erased, how one trained instinct changed the course of multiple lives, and why sometimes the heroes of our stories don't wear capes or seek recognition. Sometimes they walk away quietly, leash in hand, knowing they did what they were trained and born to do. So settle in. This is a swift tale about fate, betrayal, and salvation on four legs. And as we begin, ask yourself this: how many times has danger passed you by simply because someone or something was watching when you weren't, long before the white dress, the carefully chosen flowers, and the promises she was preparing to make? The bride had lived a life shaped by resilience. She wasn't someone who believed in fairy tales handed to her easily. Every meaningful thing she had came after struggle, after learning how to stand on her own when no one else could do it for her. Friends often described her as warm and open, but there was a quiet strength beneath her smile, the kind that comes from surviving disappointments without letting them harden your heart. She believed deeply in love, not the dramatic kind seen in movies, but the steady kind that shows up every day, even when life is exhausting. She grew up learning to read people quickly. It wasn't paranoia, it was survival. Over time, that awareness became second nature, though on the surface she appeared trusting, even gentle. She worked hard, cared deeply, and rarely asked for help. Love for her was something sacred, something you protected. That belief was what made her engagement feel like a victory. The man she was about to marry represented safety, partnership, and the future she had always hoped to build. With him, she felt seen. With him, she believed the hard part of her life was finally over. But not everyone around her shared that happiness. There were subtle signs, barely noticeable at first. A strained smile here, a comment that lingered too long there, nothing dramatic enough to raise alarms, just small cracks in the picture-perfect image of her upcoming wedding. She brushed them off, as most people do when they're in love and focused on the future. After all, what kind of person looks for danger when they're planning a wedding? What kind of mind imagines betrayal during a season meant for joy? In the weeks leading up to the ceremony, life moved quickly. Dress fittings, venue confirmations, last-minute details, it all blurred together. She was tired but happy, overwhelmed but hopeful. She talked about the future constantly, where they would live, how they would decorate their home, the life they would build side by side. To anyone watching, she was a woman stepping confidently into her next chapter, unaware that someone else had been writing a different ending for her story. What made her especially vulnerable was her belief that she had finally arrived at a place of peace. When people feel safe, they stop watching over their shoulders. They stop questioning motives. They trust that the world will treat them gently because, for once, it has been kind. That sense of safety wrapped around her like a blanket, blinding her to the quiet dangers forming just beyond her awareness. The day she chose her wedding dress, she cried, not out of stress, but gratitude. She felt lucky. She felt protected. She felt loved. In her mind, the hardest battles were behind her. She had no reason to believe that the greatest threat to her life wasn't in her past, but waiting for her on a road she had driven countless times before. And that is what makes this part of her story so important. Because tragedies don't always strike people who are reckless or careless. Sometimes they come for those who finally let their guard down, believing, just for a moment, that nothing bad could possibly happen now. She didn't see herself as someone in danger. She saw herself as a bride, a partner, a woman standing at the edge of a new beginning. What she didn't know was that her life before the wedding, her habits, her routines, her trust, had made her predictable. And predictability, in the wrong hands, can become a weapon. As she moved closer to the happiest day of her life, unseen forces were already in motion, quietly counting on the fact that she would never suspect a thing. By the time the wedding day arrived, her heart was open. Her future planned and her guard completely down. And somewhere in the background, a decision had already been made, one that assumed she would never make it to the altar at all. The morning of the wedding arrived wrapped in soft light and nervous excitement. She woke before her alarm, heart already racing, the kind of anticipation that makes sleep impossible. For a moment, she lay still, letting the reality settle in. This was the day everything changed. The day she would walk down the aisle, speak vows she had practiced in whispers, and step into a future she believed was finally safe. Outside, the world moved as it always did, unaware that this day carried a weight far heavier than celebration alone. The house was soon filled with motion and sound. Laughter echoed through the rooms as bridesmaids arrived, carrying garment bags, coffee cups, and stories meant to calm nerves. Music played softly in the background, chosen carefully to set the mood. Mirrors reflected smiles that grew wider with each passing hour. She laughed easily, though every now and then her chest tightened for reasons she couldn't quite explain. She blamed it on nerves. After all, who isn't nervous on their wedding day? As the morning unfolded, small moments stood out in ways she would only understand later. A phone call that ended too abruptly, a message that felt strangely impersonal, a pause in conversation when she entered the room. None of it was obvious enough to ruin the mood, but together they formed a faint undercurrent of unease. Still, she pushed it aside. Today was about joy. Today was about love. She refused to let doubt take up space where happiness belonged. Her dress hung near the window, glowing in the morning light. When she finally slipped into it, the room went quiet. Hands adjusted fabric, fixed buttons, smoothed lace. Someone gasped. Someone cried. She looked at her reflection and barely recognized herself, not because she looked different, but because she looked fulfilled. This was the version of herself she had always hoped to become. Strong, loved, chosen. Time seemed to accelerate after that. Schedules were checked, cars were arranged, final details confirmed. She was supposed to ride with someone else, but at the last minute, plans shifted. It wasn't dramatic, just one of those small, ordinary changes that happen on busy days. She offered to drive herself part of the way, thinking nothing of it. It would give her a moment alone, a chance to breathe before the ceremony. No one objected. No one warned her. No one knew what that decision truly meant. Before leaving, she hugged everyone tightly, laughing as someone reminded her not to cry before the makeup was fully set. She picked up her bouquet, then set it back down, deciding to leave it for later. Outside, the air felt cooler than expected. She paused beside her car, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. For just a second, something inside her hesitated, an instinct she had learned long ago, but it faded as quickly as it came. She started the engine and pulled onto the road, veil folded carefully on the passenger seat. The music played softly as she drove, thoughts drifting between excitement and memory. She didn't notice the vehicle that appeared behind her and then slowed. She didn't question the strange feeling that crept into her chest as the road stretched ahead, quiet and familiar. Miles away, unseen by her, another day was unfolding, one that would soon collide with hers in ways no one could have planned. The wedding day had begun exactly as it should have, full of hope, laughter, and promise. But beneath the beauty of it all, a shadow moved silently, waiting for the moment when celebration would turn into chaos. Several miles away from the wedding preparations and the quiet road the bride had just taken, another journey was unfolding, one shaped not by celebration, but by habit, instinct, and years of discipline. The Navy SEAL didn't wake up that morning thinking he would save a life. For him, the day began like many others since leaving active duty, early, deliberate, and quiet. Routine was his anchor now. It kept the noise of the past at a manageable distance. Beside him, already alert, was his dog, a military-trained companion who had once moved through chaos as confidently as any soldier. Their bond had been forged in places where hesitation meant death. The dog had learned to read its handler's breathing, posture, and tone, just as the SEAL had learned to trust every shift of the animal's ears, every pause, every low growl. They didn't need commands to understand each other. Years of working side by side had turned communication into instinct. When the dog reacted, the SEAL listened. That trust had saved lives before, both theirs and others. Since returning to civilian life, the SEAL avoided crowds and noise. He preferred back roads, long drives, and the steady presence of the dog at his side. On that day, he was driving without urgency, headed nowhere important, following a route he often used to clear his head. The dog lay calmly in the back seat at first, eyes half closed, body relaxed. Everything about the drive felt ordinary. And yet, to a trained mind, ordinary never meant safe. It simply meant nothing had happened yet. As they moved farther down the road, the dog shifted. Its ears lifted, its posture stiffened. The SEAL noticed immediately. He glanced in the rearview mirror, scanning the road ahead and behind, searching for the source of the animal's attention. There was nothing obvious, no sudden movement, no loud noise, no visible threat. Still, the dog's focus didn't waver. Experience had taught the SEAL not to dismiss that kind of alertness. In combat, the dog had sensed danger long before humans ever could. The SEAL felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the quiet switch flipping inside his mind from relaxed observation to heightened awareness. He slowed slightly, eyes narrowing as he took in details most drivers ignored, the spacing between vehicles, the way a car drifted across lanes, the unnatural rhythm of traffic ahead. The dog let out a low sound, not a bark, not a growl, but something in between, a warning. He didn't know it yet, but the road they were traveling was about to become the intersection of two very different lives, one driven by love and trust, the other shaped by vigilance and survival. The SEAL adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, a reflex born from years of reacting before thinking. Whatever had caught the dog's attention, it wasn't random. It never was. As they continued forward, the distance between them and the bride's vehicle slowly closed. Two paths, separate until now, were being drawn together by timing, chance, and instincts sharpened in war. The SEAL didn't believe in destiny, but he did believe in patterns. And something about this moment felt wrong in a way he had learned never to ignore. Without knowing her name, her story, or the danger she was already in, the Navy SEAL and his dog were moving toward a moment that would redefine all three of their lives. What began as an uneventful drive was quietly transforming into a test, one that would demand everything they had learned to survive, and more. The Navy SEAL's day began in silence, the kind he had grown accustomed to after years of living in constant noise. War had taught him how to function in chaos, but peace had taught him something harder, how to slow down without letting his guard fall. He rose before sunrise, moved with purpose, and spoke very little. The only constant presence in his life was his dog, a military-trained partner who had shared more danger with him than most people ever would. To outsiders, the animal looked calm, almost ordinary. To the SEAL, the dog was a living radar, finely tuned by experience and trust. They had served together overseas, where the dog's instincts had often meant the difference between walking away and never walking at all. Explosives hidden beneath dirt roads, ambushes disguised as silence, threats no human eye could catch. The dog had sensed them first, every time. That history made the seal listen without question when the animal reacted. There was no second guessing, no debate. Instinct had earned its authority the hard way. That morning, they were driving along a quiet stretch of road the seal often took when he needed space. No destination, no deadline, just movement, just breathing. The dog rested in the back seat, head low, eyes scanning lazily at first. Everything felt normal, too normal, some part of the seal's mind noted. Years of training had conditioned him to be suspicious of calm. Calm was often the moment before things went wrong. Without warning, the dog's body tensed. Its head lifted sharply, ears locked forward, muscles coiling as if preparing to act. The seal felt it instantly, even before he looked back. His foot eased off the accelerator, eyes moving across the road with practiced precision. Nothing obvious stood out, no sudden swerving, no visible threat, but the dog's attention was fixed ahead, unwavering. That was enough. A familiar focus settled over the seal, cold and controlled. His breathing slowed. His hands tightened slightly on the wheel. This wasn't panic, it was readiness. The kind that comes from knowing danger rarely announces itself. The dog released a low, restrained sound, one the seal recognized well. It wasn't fear, it was warning. As they continued down the road, traffic patterns began to feel wrong. A car ahead moved inconsistently. Another lingered too long behind someone else. The seal couldn't yet name the threat, but he could feel its shape forming. The dog shifted again, eyes tracking something the seal couldn't fully see yet. Whatever was happening, it was unfolding fast. Unbeknownst to both of them, a bride was driving just ahead, her thoughts filled with love, her guard completely down. Two worlds were converging, one defined by hope and trust, the other by vigilance and survival. The seal didn't know why his instincts were flaring, only that they were never wrong. And as the distance between his vehicle and hers narrowed, he had no idea that this ordinary drive was about to pull him back into the one role he could never truly leave behind. Protecto. Without orders, without recognition, just instinct, a trained dog, and a moment that would demand action before thought. The road stretched ahead in long, quiet lines, bordered by trees that blurred together as the bride drove forward, her thoughts drifting between past memories and future promises. She adjusted the radio, then turned it down again, preferring the hum of the engine and the rhythm of the tires against the asphalt. This was supposed to be her moment of calm, a pause between who she had been and who she was about to become. She didn't know it yet, but this stretch of road would soon become the dividing line between life, as she understood it, and everything that came after. Behind her, the Navy SEAL's vehicle moved steadily, close enough for instinct to register, far enough to avoid attention. He hadn't planned to follow her, but patterns had a way of pulling his focus. The dog's gaze remained locked forward, body angled toward the window, muscles tense in a way that made the seal uneasy. Years of experience told him that when a trained animal fixated like this, something was wrong, not loud, not obvious, but wrong in a way that demanded attention. The environment itself seemed to conspire with that unease. Traffic thinned as the road curved away from the city, leaving long gaps of isolation between vehicles. The air felt heavier, the sky dimmer, though no storm had been forecast. The bride noticed the emptiness and felt a faint shiver run through her, but she dismissed it as nerves. Weddings came with emotions, she reminded herself. This was normal, everything was normal. The dog shifted again, letting out a low sound that barely reached the seal's ears. He slowed slightly, increasing the distance between himself and the car ahead, watching for inconsistencies. The bride's vehicle drifted just a little at times, not enough to be dangerous, but enough to suggest distraction or unease. Then another car appeared farther back, maintaining a strange, deliberate distance. Too steady, too intentional. The seal's attention sharpened. His mind began assembling fragments into something recognizable. He had seen this before, not in traffic, but in operations where movement was meant to look natural. Where danger hid behind routine, his foot hovered over the brake as his eyes tracked the positions of each vehicle on the road. The dog's warning grew more intense, its body coiled now ready. Up ahead, the road narrowed slightly, flanked by dense trees and limited shoulder space. The bride slowed instinctively, sensing the change in terrain. Her phone buzzed beside her, a notification she didn't look at. For a brief second, her focus slipped. That was all it took. The seal felt it before it happened, a tightening in his gut, the sudden clarity that comes when threat crosses from possibility into certainty. The dog's quiet warning turned into urgency, its attention snapping toward the bride's car as if trying to will it out of harm's way. Whatever was unfolding, it was reaching its point of no return. On that unremarkable stretch of road, with no witnesses and no warning signs, the final pieces slid into place. One driver carried love and trust into the future. Another carried instincts sharpened by war. And somewhere in between them, a plan designed to look like fate was about to reveal itself, turning an ordinary drive into the moment. Everything changed forever. Nothing about the road screamed danger. That was the most unsettling part. It was clean, recently paved, curving gently through a stretch of trees that muffled sound and hid sightlines. To an untrained eye, it was just another forgotten route, quiet, predictable, and perfect for letting your thoughts wander. To someone who knew how accidents were staged, however, it was ideal for something far more deliberate. The kind of place where mistakes could be blamed on bad luck and no one would think to ask deeper questions. The bride adjusted her grip on the steering wheel as the road narrowed. She felt a strange pressure in her chest, a whisper of instinct trying to surface. Her foot eased off the accelerator without conscious thought. She couldn't explain why, only that something felt off. She glanced in the rearview mirror, noticing a vehicle farther back than expected, matching her speed too precisely. The moment passed, and she told herself she was imagining things. Today was supposed to be happy. Fear didn't belong here. Behind her, the Navy SEAL saw what she didn't. He noticed how the car behind her drifted closer whenever the road tightened, then fell back when visibility improved. It wasn't aggressive. It was controlled, measured. His jaw tightened as recognition set in. He had seen movements like this before in hostile territory, actions designed to influence behavior without drawing attention. The dog growled low now, a sound that came only when danger was imminent. The SEAL increased his following distance, creating space for reaction. His eyes flicked between mirrors and windshield, tracking angles, escape routes, and timing. He saw the moment the bride's brake lights flashed briefly, not from traffic, but from hesitation. That hesitation mattered. It meant she sensed something too, even if she couldn't name it. Ahead, a dark shape lay near the shoulder of the road, something small, metallic, and out of place. The bride didn't notice it until it was too late. When her tire clipped it, the car jolted violently, pulling to one side. She gasped, instinctively correcting, heart slamming against her ribs. The vehicle behind her closed the distance instantly, forcing her options narrower with every second. The SEAL swore under his breath. This wasn't random debris. This was placement. He had seen similar tactics used to force vehicles into predictable reactions. The dog lunged forward against its restraint, barking now, urgency spilling over. The SEAL braked hard, hazard lights flashing, already anticipating impact. The bride fought the wheel as the car fishtailed, tires screaming against the pavement. Her thoughts shattered into fragments: stay straight, slow down, don't panic. But panic surged anyway as another vehicle surged too close behind her, boxing her in. There was nowhere to go, trees crowded the shoulder. The road curved sharply ahead. In that moment, the plan revealed itself fully. The setup was complete. All it needed now was physics to do the rest. As the bride's car lost traction and began to slide, the SEAL felt the sick certainty that someone had intended for this to end only one way. A crash designed to look like fate. And it was about to happen. The moment arrived without mercy. 1 second the bride was fighting for control, heart pounding so loudly it drowned out every other sound, and the next the world tilted violently to the left. The steering wheel wrenched against her hands as the car spun, tires screaming in protest. Time fractured. Each heartbeat stretched into something long and unreal, every sensation burning sharp and clear. She caught a glimpse of trees rushing toward her, then nothing but motion and fear. Metal collided with metal in a deafening roar. The impact sent the car skidding sideways, slamming into the guardrail before rebounding back across the road. Glass exploded outward, tiny shards catching the light like brief flashes of ice. Her body jerked forward, the seatbelt biting into her chest as the air was knocked from her lungs. Pain flared, hot, blinding, everywhere at once. The car spun again, momentum carrying it off the pavement and into the dirt shoulder beyond. From behind, the Navy SEAL saw it all unfold in brutal clarity. The moment the bride's vehicle lost control, his training took over. He braked hard, steering into the skid to avoid the debris and twisting metal now scattered across the road. The dog barked fiercely, a sharp, urgent sound that cut through the chaos. The seal's eyes never left the wreckage ahead, already calculating angles and distance even as adrenaline surged through his veins. The bride's car finally came to a stop against a cluster of trees, the front end crushed inward like a clenched fist. Steam hissed from the engine. The smell of burned rubber and gasoline filled the air. For a brief, terrifying moment, everything went silent. No movement, no sound, just the ticking of cooling metal and the faint crackle of something sparking beneath the hood. Inside the car, the bride struggled to breathe. Her vision blurred, darkness pressing in at the edges. She tried to move her legs, her arms, something responded, something didn't. Panic threatened to swallow her whole. She tasted blood and realized she was crying, though she hadn't noticed when the tears began. Her wedding dress, still carefully folded on the seat beside her, was now stained and crushed, a cruel reminder of what this day was supposed to be. The seal was out of his vehicle before it fully stopped, moving with speed that came from muscle memory rather than thought. He shouted to her, his voice calm but forceful, cutting through the haze of her fear. The dog leapt from the car as soon as the door opened, racing ahead, circling the wreckage with frantic intensity. Its nose pressed to twisted metal and shattered glass, searching, assessing, alerting. Other vehicles slowed, some stopping at a distance, their drivers frozen by shock. The car that had followed too closely moments before was gone, vanished down the road as if it had never existed. The seal noticed that absence immediately, filing it away even as he reached the bride's door. "Stay with me," he said, his voice steady, grounding. He checked for fire, for leaking fuel, for structural collapse. The dog stood rigid beside him, watching the surrounding area, ears scanning for threats even now. The seal forced the door open with a grunt, metal groaning in protest. The bride looked up at him through tears and blood, eyes wide with disbelief. She tried to speak, but no sound came. Her wedding day had become a nightmare in seconds. As the seal assessed her injuries and the dog pressed close, a protective presence in the chaos, one truth became painfully clear. This crash was no accident. And if help didn't come fast, the plan that had failed once might still succeed. The Navy SEAL didn't waste a second. Chaos was something he understood intimately, and while others stood frozen at a distance, unsure of what to do, he moved with purpose. His voice stayed calm as he spoke to the bride, even though everything around them screamed urgency. He told her to focus on his words. To keep breathing, to stay awake. Every instruction was deliberate, designed to anchor her mind while he assessed the damage to her body. The dog remained close, circling once before positioning itself beside the open door, its presence both protective and alert. Its ears stayed trained on the road, its body angled outward, guarding them from any further threat. This wasn't just loyalty, it was training layered with instinct. The animal understood that the danger wasn't necessarily over. Whoever had wanted this crash might still be nearby. The seal checked her pulse, her breathing, the alignment of her limbs. Blood ran from a cut near her temple, but she was conscious, responding, fighting to stay present. He instructed her not to move her neck, supporting her head with one hand as he stabilized her spine. His movements were precise, practiced in environments where hesitation cost lives. To her, his steady hands and unshaken voice became the only thing holding panic at bay. Smoke thickened around the front of the car, and the sharp smell of fuel grew stronger. The seal made a quick decision. Leaving her inside wasn't an option. Working carefully, he coordinated with a bystander he'd finally allowed closer, giving clear, authoritative instructions. Together, they shifted the seat, cut the seatbelt, and eased her out of the twisted vehicle inch by inch, every movement controlled to avoid worsening her injuries. The moment her weight transferred fully into his arms, the bride broke down, sobs shaking her body as reality crashed in. She clutched at his sleeve, terrified and disoriented, asking broken questions he didn't answer yet. He laid her gently on the ground, keeping her still, using his jacket to apply pressure where it was needed. The dog pressed against her side, warm and solid, its head resting near her arm as if reminding her she wasn't alone. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Someone had finally called for help, but until they arrived, the seal remained vigilant. He scanned the road repeatedly, noting the absence of the vehicle that had followed her earlier. That detail bothered him deeply. Accidents leave witnesses. This one had lost one. As paramedics arrived and took over, the SEAL briefed them quickly, efficiently. He didn't dramatize. He didn't speculate. He stuck to facts, injuries, timing, observations. Still, his final words were firm. This crash needed to be investigated. There were too many irregularities to ignore. As the bride was loaded into the ambulance, she reached out once more, her fingers brushing his hand. Her eyes met his, filled with gratitude and confusion and fear. He nodded, offering reassurance without promises. The dog watched silently, tail still, eyes sharp, as if memorizing her face. When the ambulance doors closed and the sirens grew louder, the SEAL finally exhaled. The immediate danger had passed, but the mission wasn't over, not yet. A life had been saved, but a question now hung heavily in the air. Who wanted the bride dead, and why? The hospital room was quiet in a way that felt unnatural after the violence of the crash. Machines hummed softly, monitors blinking in steady rhythms that reassured everyone except the bride herself. She lay still beneath white sheets, bruised, aching, alive, but unable to shake the feeling that survival had been a mistake someone else hadn't planned for. Doctors spoke in careful tones, explaining fractures, concussions, recovery timelines. She nodded, listened, thanked them. Yet her mind kept drifting back to the road, to the moment she lost control, to the car that had been there 1 second and gone the next. Law enforcement arrived before the painkillers fully dulled her awareness. At first, the questions were routine: speed, weather, distraction, seatbelt. But as she answered, uncertainty crept into the room. She mentioned the object on the road, the pressure from behind, the way she felt boxed in with nowhere to escape. The officers exchanged glances, not accusatory, but alert. Accidents had patterns. This one didn't fit neatly into any of them. The Navy SEAL gave his statement separately. His tone was calm, unemotional, but his observations were sharp. He described vehicle positioning, timing, and behavior that suggested intent rather than coincidence. He spoke about the debris placement, the trailing car's disappearance, and the way the incident unfolded too cleanly to be chance. He didn't accuse. He didn't speculate wildly. He simply stated what he had seen and what didn't make sense. That was enough to change the direction of the investigation. Traffic cameras along nearby intersections were reviewed. Footage revealed a vehicle matching the SEAL's description following the bride for several miles before the crash, maintaining distance with unnerving precision. Another camera caught a figure on the roadside earlier that morning, placing something near the shoulder before disappearing from view. It wasn't clear who they were, but it was clear they didn't belong there. As the evidence stacked up, a darker truth began to surface. The crash wasn't a tragic twist of fate, it was a failed attempt. Detectives dug into the bride's personal life, not because they suspected her, but because someone close to her had known her schedule, her route, her habits. They examined phone records, financial ties, recent conflicts. Slowly, connections emerged that made her stomach turn. Conversations she'd brushed off, tensions she'd minimized, warnings she'd never imagined were real. When investigators finally explained it to her, the room seemed to tilt all over again. Someone she trusted, someone who smiled at her, celebrated her engagement, wished her happiness, had believed her death would solve a problem. Motive came down to something painfully ordinary: control, money, resentment, fear of exposure. The kind of reasons that never feel big enough to justify the damage they cause. The bride cried, not just from shock, but from grief. Not for herself alone, but for the illusion she had lived inside. For the belief that love and safety were guaranteed. For the realization that she had been targeted while planning the happiest day of her life. As warrants were issued and arrests followed, the Navy SEAL watched from a distance. He didn't feel triumph. He felt resolve. This wasn't about justice as a headline, it was about preventing a second attempt. The dog stayed close, quiet but alert, as if it understood that the danger had shifted but not vanished entirely. By the time the truth was undeniable, one fact stood above everything else. If instinct hadn't intervened, if a trained eye and a loyal dog hadn't been on that road at that exact moment, the bride's story would have ended as an unfortunate accident. Instead, it had become something else, entirely. A narrow escape, a betrayal exposed, and the beginning of consequences no one could stop anymore. There are moments in life that divide everything into before and after, and for the bride, the car crash became that line. Before, she believed danger was something distant, something that happened to other people in other stories. After, she understood how fragile life truly is and how close she came to losing hers without ever knowing why. One ordinary drive, one familiar road, nearly erased her future. And yet she survived, not because she was lucky, but because someone else was paying attention when she couldn't. This story reminds us that fate doesn't always arrive with ceremony. Sometimes it comes disguised as routine, as coincidence, as an ordinary day that feels safe enough to lower your guard. The bride trusted the world because she had every reason to. She was in love. She was hopeful. She was on her way to begin a new chapter. That trust was almost used against her. And if not for a Navy SEAL who had learned to read danger in silence, and a dog whose instincts refused to be ignored, this story would have ended very differently. There is something powerful in the bond between humans and animals, especially those trained to protect. The dog didn't know the bride, didn't understand weddings or vows or futures, but it understood threat, it understood urgency, and because its warning was trusted, a life was saved. Loyalty, awareness, and experience came together in a moment that mattered more than anyone could have known at the time. What makes this story linger isn't just the betrayal or the survival, it's the reminder that heroes don't always wear uniforms or seek recognition. Sometimes they're driving down a quiet road, minding their own business, ready to act because they never truly stopped being protectors. Sometimes they walk away afterward, leaving behind nothing but a changed life and unanswered questions about what might have been. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on your own life. How often do we ignore that uneasy feeling? How often do we dismiss instincts because they seem inconvenient or irrational? This story encourages us to stay aware, to listen, whether it's to our own intuition or to those trained to see what we can't. And before you go, let me ask you this. Do you believe this was fate, or was it the result of discipline, training, and loyalty doing exactly what they were meant to do? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. Recovery didn't begin the moment the danger passed. It began slowly, painfully, in fragments. The bride woke each morning in the hospital with a heavy awareness that her body had survived something her mind was still trying to understand. Bruises bloomed across her skin in deep shades of purple and yellow. Her movements were careful, measured, as if her body no longer trusted itself. Every ache was a reminder that she had come terrifyingly close to never waking up at all. Emotionally, the damage ran deeper. Sleep became unpredictable. When she did rest, her dreams pulled her back to the road, the screech of tires, the weightless moment before impact, the sudden violence of it all. She replayed details over and over, searching for signs she might have missed. The guilt surprised her most. She blamed herself for trusting too easily, for ignoring that brief hesitation before she started the car, for believing that love alone could protect her from harm. The wedding, once the center of her world, faded into the background. Plans were postponed without discussion. The dress remained untouched, sealed away like a relic from a life that no longer felt real. People spoke gently around her, careful with their words, unsure whether to mention the future or avoid it altogether. She realized that surviving didn't automatically mean moving forward. It meant rebuilding, piece by fragile piece. As the investigation continued, she was asked to relive the worst moments of her life in sterile rooms with fluorescent lights. Each retelling stripped away another layer of denial. Hearing the truth spoken out loud, that someone she trusted had wanted her dead, felt more violent than the crash itself. Betrayal left no visible scars, but it reshaped the way she looked at everyone. Trust, once freely given, now had to be earned slowly. Yet in the midst of all that darkness, something unexpected took root. Gratitude. She thought often about the Navy SEAL and his dog, their calm voices, their steady presence, the way fear had loosened its grip the moment she wasn't alone anymore. Knowing that someone had stepped in without obligation, without hesitation, gave her something solid to hold on to when the nights felt too long. Physical therapy became a quiet form of victory. Each small improvement, standing longer, walking farther, breathing without pain, felt like reclaiming ground the crash had stolen. She learned to celebrate progress instead of perfection. Healing, she realized, wasn't about returning to who she had been before. That version of her no longer existed. Healing meant becoming someone new, someone more cautious, yes, but also more aware, more intentional about the life she was choosing to continue living. In time, she began to speak about what happened, not as a victim, but as a survivor. She found strength in telling the truth, in refusing to let silence protect the people who had tried to erase her. The road would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined the ending. She was still here, still breathing, still capable of love, even if it now came with boundaries and wisdom earned the hard way. The crash had taken many things from her, but it had also given her something unexpected, a fierce understanding of her own resilience. And slowly, with each passing day, she began to believe that surviving wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of another one, when everything was over, when the sirens faded, the statements were taken, and the immediate danger passed. The Navy SEAL did what he had always done after a mission. He disappeared, not out of indifference but habit. Attention made him uneasy. Praise felt undeserved. He hadn't set out to be a hero that day. He had simply responded to a situation the only way he knew how. Once the professionals had taken over and the bride was safe, his role was finished. He returned to a life built on simplicity, early mornings, long walks, minimal conversation. The dog stayed close as it always did, a constant presence that required no explanations. Together they fell back into their familiar rhythm, but something had shifted beneath the surface. The SEAL found himself replaying the crash in quiet moments, analyzing decisions, wondering how close he'd come to arriving too late. The questions weren't loud, but they lingered. For years he had carried the weight of lives he couldn't save, faces that returned in dreams, choices that ended badly despite his best efforts. That burden never fully leaves someone trained for war. But this time, the memory was different. This time, when he closed his eyes, he saw a woman breathing because he had been there. He saw a plan unravel because instinct had intervened. The outcome mattered. The dog seemed to sense the change as well. It stayed unusually attentive in the days that followed, watching him more closely, resting its head against his leg during long silences. The SEAL understood that bond better than any human connection he'd ever known. They had trusted each other in moments where trust meant survival. On that road, that trust had once again proven its worth. Occasionally, investigators reached out with follow-up questions. He answered them directly, without embellishment. He didn't push for updates or ask about arrests. Justice wasn't something he chased, it was something he hoped would happen. His concern had always been immediate: stop the threat, protect the innocent, then step back. There were moments when he considered checking in on the bride, wondering how she was healing, whether she had found peace after learning the truth. But he resisted. He understood the importance of distance. Some rescues are meant to be bridges, not bonds. He had entered her life at its most violent moment. Staying longer might tether her to that trauma. Instead, he chose to honor the moment quietly. He volunteered more, stayed alert, trusted his instincts even more deeply. The road had reminded him that his skills still mattered, not just in war zones, but in ordinary places where danger hides behind normalcy. The SEAL never spoke publicly about what happened. There were no interviews, no medals, no recognition beyond a few knowing nods from professionals who understood the weight of silent service. For him, that was enough. As he and the dog continued down their familiar paths, one truth remained clear: some people never truly stop being protectors. They don't wear the uniform forever, but the responsibility stays with them. And on a quiet road, on an ordinary day, that responsibility had once again changed the course of a life, without ever asking for thanks in return. Justice did not arrive quickly, and it did not arrive gently. It crept forward through paperwork, interviews, surveillance footage, and long hours spent connecting pieces that someone had believed would never be examined closely. What was meant to look like a tragic accident became, step by step, a carefully constructed case. The deeper investigators looked, the clearer the picture became, and the more disturbing it was. The person responsible had underestimated two things: instinct and attention. They believed the road would stay silent, that metal and speed would erase intent. But patterns don't lie, and evidence has a way of surfacing when people survive. Phone records placed them near the area earlier that morning. Financial transactions revealed motive. Messages once dismissed as harmless suddenly carried a darker meaning when viewed through the lens of attempted murder. When the arrest was finally made, it sent shockwaves through the bride's world. The betrayal was no longer theoretical, it had a name, a face, and consequences. Seeing that person in handcuffs did not bring the satisfaction she expected. Instead, it brought a heavy sadness. This was someone she had once trusted, someone who had smiled at her and spoken about the future as if they were part of it. Justice, she learned, doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it feels like mourning something that never truly existed. The legal process forced everything into the open. Details were laid bare in courtrooms and documents, stripped of emotion and reduced to facts. The bride testified when she was ready, her voice steady despite the weight of the room. She didn't speak from anger, she spoke from truth. Each word reclaimed a piece of power that had been taken from her on that road. The Navy SEAL's statement became a quiet cornerstone of the case. His observations, precise, unemotional, and impossible to dismiss, helped dismantle the defense's attempt to frame the crash as coincidence. He never appeared in person. He didn't need to. His words carried the authority of experience, and that was enough. When the verdict was delivered, it wasn't dramatic. No outbursts, no grand speeches, just a final acknowledgement that the attempt to erase a life had failed, and that failure would now carry consequences. The sentence could never undo the trauma, but it sent a message that intent matters even when a plan doesn't succeed. For the bride, justice marked a turning point, not an ending. It closed one chapter while forcing her to accept that some scars don't fade neatly. Accountability brought clarity, but healing remained her own journey. Still, knowing that the truth had been recognized, publicly and permanently, gave her something she hadn't felt since before the crash. Safety. Justice, she realized, wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure what happened to her could not quietly happen to someone else. And in that sense, the consequences reached far beyond the courtroom, into every life that would now be spared because the truth had been uncovered. Time softened the sharpest edges of the trauma, but it did not erase memory. Some connections, once formed, never truly disappear, they simply change shape. For the bride, the Navy SEAL and his dog became symbols rather than constant presences, reminders of the moment when everything could have ended but didn't. She carried them with her in quiet ways, in the pauses before decisions, in the trust she slowly learned to rebuild. Months after the trial, their paths crossed once more. There was no dramatic reunion, no tears or speeches, just a simple meeting arranged through brief messages and mutual understanding. She stood a little straighter now, moving carefully but confidently, her eyes clearer than they had been in the hospital. When she thanked him, the words felt inadequate, but they were honest. He nodded, uncomfortable with praise, accepting it only because it mattered to her. The dog approached her first, calm and watchful, tail low but steady. When she knelt carefully and rested a hand against its fur, something inside her loosened. This was the presence that had guarded her when she was most vulnerable, that had stood between her and a threat she never saw coming. She smiled for the first time without forcing it. The dog leaned in briefly, then stepped back, as if acknowledging the moment and letting it pass. They spoke only for a short while, about recovery, about moving forward, about ordinary things that felt extraordinary simply because life had continued. The SEAL never explained what drove him to act. He didn't need to. She understood now that some people are shaped by responsibility in ways that never fully leave them. When it was time to part, there were no promises to stay in touch. Some bonds aren't meant to stretch across years. They exist to carry you through a single, critical moment. As they walked away in opposite directions, the bride felt something unexpected. Peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because she had faced the truth, survived it, and thanked the people who helped her do so. The bond that remained wasn't one of dependency, but of gratitude and respect, a quiet thread woven into the fabric of her life. Heroes don't always stay. Sometimes they arrive, change everything, and leave behind the strength to keep going alone. Some stories don't end with certainty or perfect closure. They end with understanding. The bride's life did not return to what it was before the crash, and perhaps that was never the point. What she gained instead was something deeper, a clearer sense of what it means to be alive, to be aware, and to keep moving forward even when the world proves it can be dangerous in ways we never expect. The road where everything changed still exists, quiet and unremarkable to anyone passing through. Cars still drive it every day, unaware of what once unfolded there. But for her, it will always be a reminder of how close she came to losing everything and how survival sometimes depends on forces outside our control. Timing, instinct, the presence of someone who refuses to look away. This story leaves us with a powerful truth: evil often hides behind familiarity, while courage often arrives unannounced. The bride didn't survive because she was stronger than everyone else. She survived because awareness met preparation at exactly the right moment. A trained protector, a loyal dog, a choice to act instead of assume. Life rarely warns us before it changes forever, but it does give us lessons in hindsight. Listen to your instincts. Pay attention to the quiet signals. Don't dismiss the feeling that something isn't right simply because it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. And remember that help can come from places you never expect, sometimes from strangers who owe you nothing but give you everything anyway. As this story closes, it's worth holding on to one final thought. Survival is not just about escaping death. It's about choosing how to live afterward, with intention, with wisdom, with gratitude for every ordinary moment that once seemed guaranteed. This was not just a story about a bride, a crash, or a rescue. It was a story about how fragile life is and how powerful it can be when courage and instinct stand in its defense.